Hello, and welcome to this short video brought to you by Tutor2U. This video is going to be looking at the AQA A Level specification for psychology, and in particular, we are going to be covering research methods and experimental design. So what is an experimental design? Now, experimental design, the clue is in the name. They are used in experiments. So experimental design describes the way participants are allocated to experimental groups of an investigation. The types of design include, and the ones you need to know about are, independent groups, repeated measures, and matched pairs design. So let's start with independent groups. Now with an independent groups design, different participants take part in each experimental condition, and they'll be allocated randomly. So independent, for each condition, the participants are independent from one another. Now this might be that you want to test for the effects of alcohol on someone's memory. So in an independent groups design, you might put half of your participants into a group where they are drinking vodka and another half into a group that aren't drinking any alcohol at all. Or you might want to test the effects of energy drinks on fitness. So you might put half of your participants into a group who are going to drink Lucozade before doing a particular fitness test, and another one drinking another different type of fitness drink, sports drink, such as Powerade. So for your exam, you don't only need to know what each of the experimental designs are, but you also need to be able to evaluate them. So this is pulling out strengths and limitations. So what is strength of independent groups design? Firstly, order effects cannot be observed, as no participants will be used in more than one condition. Now remember, when we talk about experimental design, order effects is the idea that participants are taking part in more than one condition, and by the time they get to the second or the third condition, there might be some sort of effect on the participants. They might get bored or tired, or they might get used to the test that you've asked them to do. In an independent groups design, because the participants are only taking part in one condition, this will not occur. Another strength is that data collection will be less time consuming if all conditions of the experiment can be conducted simultaneously. In other words, because the participants are only taking part in one condition, you could carry out all the conditions at the same time. It takes a lot quicker. However, a weakness is that different participants might need to be recruited or will need to be recruited for each condition, and that can be difficult and expensive. You can't reuse your participants in more than one condition. Also, there is a risk of participant variables. Participant variables are individual differences between participants, and these might affect the results between conditions, rather than solely manipulation of the independent variable. So it might be to do with fitness levels that the participants used, or age, or IQ scores, or gender. Any of these would be examples of participant variables. The second experimental design is repeated measures. This is the complete opposite to independent groups, and this is where the same participants are allocated to all groups of an experiment. In other words, they take part in all of the conditions available. So if we went back to our previous example and you wanted to look at the effects of alcohol on memory, you might ask all of your participants to drink some vodka, a specified amount, and then do a picture recall test. And then the next day they will come back drinking no alcohol and do the same picture recall test. So it's the same group of participants which are used. Now, what's the strength of using a repeated measure design, and what is a limitation? Now, here's a handy exam tip here. What you should notice here on the screen is that the strengths of the repeated measure design are the weaknesses of the independent groups, and the strengths of the independent groups are the weaknesses of the repeated measures. So in other words, if you can just remember a couple of strengths or limitations, depending on what experimental design you get asked to talk about or evaluate, you can just flip these strengths and weaknesses to the correct one. So the first strength of a repeated measure design is that the results will not be subject to participant variables, like the independent groups would, putting more confidence in dependent variable changes being solely due to manipulated changes in the IV. Another strength is, as the same participants are used at least twice, extra participants don't need to be recruited, saving time and money. However, the weaknesses, and as we said here, these are just flipped from the independent groups design, there is a risk of observing order effects. However, this can be controlled by counterbalancing, and we do talk about counterbalancing in one of our other videos, so make sure you check that out if you are not sure what counterbalancing is. Another weakness is that if a participant drops out, data will be lost from all the conditions of the experiment rather than just one. Now, you should remember this with ethics. Hopefully, a participant can choose to withdraw their data at any time. Obviously, if that participant has only taken part in one condition, that might only be a small bit of data that you are going to lose. But if that participant has taken part in all of the conditions of the experiment, that could be a lot of data which is lost. The final design you need to know about is a matched pairs design. Now, after the initial step, a matched pairs design is very similar to independent groups. However, a step is taken before. So matched pairs is where participants take part in only one experimental condition, just like independent groups, but they are recruited specifically to be similar in relevant characteristics. For example, intelligence, gender, age, to match participants in the other condition. So for example, you might give your participants an IQ test. The two highest scoring, one would be put in condition A and the other would be put into condition B. Or you might match them on gender. So you might put the same amount of males and the same amount of females in one condition as you would in the other condition. So even though these participants take part in the group independently and just one condition, they've been matched before on a particular variable. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of using a matched pairs design? So for the first strength, this is very similar to independent groups. Order effects will not be observed because the participants only had to take part in one condition. In other words, they haven't had to take part in one condition, then move on to the next one and started to get used to the experiment, got familiar with it, maybe getting a little bit bored, maybe getting a little bit tired, maybe they have practiced some of the tests you might be giving them in the conditions. In this case, order effects won't be observed. Another strength is that the tailored participant matching process reduces the risk of participant variables. This is individual differences between participants from affecting results between conditions. However, a weakness, different participants need to be recruited for each condition, which again, similar to independent groups, is difficult and expensive. Another weakness is that matching is a more complex process, and it will always be very difficult to match participants identically. Thank you for watching this AQA A Level Psychology video brought to you by Tutor2You, which focused on research methods and experimental design.